At this point, they had a fuel of about 2,644 kilos, and the minimum diversion fuel down towards Trivandrum was 2,614 kilos. So they're basically bang on their minimum diversion fuel. They requested to climb to 21,000 feet to flight level 210, and as they were cleared to climb, they received an updated weather report from Trivandrum where the visibility had now started to go down to 2,500 meters. At time 0102 UTC, that's 0630 local time, the Jet Airways crew got into contact with Trivandrum ATC. Trivandrum ATC told them that they could expect runway 14 for the VOR approach and that the visibility has now gone down to 1,500 meters. And that's a problem because the minimum visibility to start the VOR approach for that runway was 2,100 meters. When the captain heard this, he asked if there was high-intensity approach lights and runway lights available to him because he wanted to use something called converted MET visibility in order to start the approach. Now, converted MET visibility is basically a tool that we pilots have when we're flying and we don't have access to proper RVR. We only have reported MET visibility, and that was the case here. Because if you, for example, can see 500 meters normal visibility, but you're looking at a very strong light, it's very likely that you'll be able to see that light at a much further distance. So especially during hours of darkness, we can actually use a table to convert reported visibility into converted MET visibility and thus get a higher visibility number to enable us to start an approach. And that was what the captain was trying to do here. Unfortunately, at this runway, that wasn't available. So our traffic control told him that no, we only have a simple approach light system with high intensity. But anyway, the captain did the conversion anyway, which enabled him to start the approach. And this is where things are starting to get a little bit sketchy. The crew now starts descending down towards Trivandrum, but when they're about 25 miles away from the airport, the captain realizes that he's way too high to start this approach. That might be because he was expecting to do a full procedural arrival and he actually started getting radar vectors in for the approach. But in any case, he had to do a 360-degree turn in order to lose a little bit of altitude, which of course used up a little bit of fuel as well. After this, the crew declares minimum fuel to air traffic control. Minimum fuel is the first step in a multi-step process indicating that they have a fuel problem. And minimum fuel is not an emergency call, but it tells air traffic control that this aircraft has reduced its available airport down to 1, and that any change to their current clearance might lead to this aircraft landing with less than final reserve fuel. And anytime that an aircrew sees that they're going to land with less than final reserve, they have to declare an emergency, which is the next step in that process. Air traffic control acknowledged the message and cleared the crew for a VOR approach, runway 14, and they also cleared them to land runway 14 with a visibility of 2,000 meters. At time 0119 UTC, Jet Airways Flight 555 reaches its minimum descent altitude on the VOR approach without being able to see the runway. This now means that they have to execute their fourth go-around of the day. And when they hit the toga buttons, they're down to a fuel of 1,324 kilos. And remember that the final reserve fuel is only about 1,300 kilo. And that means that 40 seconds after they initiate the go-around, they now call Mayday, 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 fuel. Jet Airways Flight 555. Whenever a fuel emergency is announced, this opens up all available runways, airports, and approaches for the aircraft that has declared the emergency. This includes military airports as well. So after having declared the emergency, the captain now asks air traffic control if he can do a visual approach in for runway 14 instead. And this is where things are starting to get really, really crazy. Because remember, they've just done a VOR approach down to runway 14. They didn't see enough to land from that approach. So to be able to do a visual approach, as the name suggests, you're doing that visually. You need to see the whole runway and the runway environment clearly in order to safely do a visual approach, which is not backed up by any nav aids. Now, a visual approach is something that we would do in order to do a slightly tighter approach, in order to save some time and fuel, but you have to have really, really good weather in order to do this, and they do not have this weather. Now, I understand that the captain at this point is probably starting to panic a little bit. He doesn't think that he has enough fuel to safely fly a full procedure VOR approach in, and he just wants to get the aircraft down on the ground. But on the other hand, he doesn't see the runway, so it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, he levels off the aircraft at approximately 1,000 feet above ground level, which is lower than we would normally do during a visual approach. He then flies downwind until he is approximately abeam the threshold for runway 15